Hello, and welcome to the Fiction Nonfiction podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your social media feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Vivi Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, the author of the novel Brotherless Night.
And I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant. How old are you?
Really, I have to say this on the record on our show, I'm 45.
Yes. Okay, 45. It's too bad.
Thanks so much.
I mean, no offense. You're young compared to me, but it would seem, at least according to my oldest son, who is 20, that we are too old to understand why Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist, recently won the Democratic primary to be mayor of New York City.
Why can't I understand that? I totally would have voted for him. And what about you were a Sanders supporter in 2020?
I know, but the olds like us don't matter, at least in the New York electorate. 40% of the voters in the New York mayoral primary were under the age of 40. And those voters broke heavily for Mamdani, who is, by the way, 33 years old, 12 years younger than you. And I think of you as young, to be honest.
That's accurate. Anyway, I'm not even going to mention how old you are, but we could maybe use some help parsing the meaning and motivation behind this encouraging surge in young progressive voters in New York and what it may mean for politics across the US going forward.
And to do that, we were joined by Raina Lipsitz. Raina's writing on politics and culture has appeared in Al Jazeera America, The Appeal, The Atlantic, The Conversationalist, The Nation, and The New Republic, among other publications. In 2016, the National Women's Political Caucus honored her with an Exceptional Merit in Media Award, Emma, for outstanding work on issues of importance to women and girls. She is also the author of the 2022 book, The Rise of a New Left, How Young Radicals Are Shaping the Future of American Politics. Roller Coaster Press published a Korean translation of that book in 2023, and she's here to talk to us about those young radicals, the role they played in Mamdani's victory, and how they might shape our politics going forward. Welcome, Raina.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, are you in Brooklyn now? You live in Brooklyn, I'm assuming.
I
You're talking to
am
us
in
from
Brooklyn. Yeah.
You're from Buffalo. But given your reporting on the New Left and organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, how closely were you following Mamdani's campaign? I mean, what was it like to be in New York during this election and after? Were you surprised by his victory?
I will tell you, it was probably the most exciting time in my whole life. I worked very hard, actually, in a volunteer capacity on the campaign. I think that I spent more time knocking doors for Zohran Mamdani than I have for any other candidate, and I was a pretty big Bernie person, but I didn't put as much time into it as I did on this race. And people are very, very, very excited here. Every time I go out wearing a Zohran t-shirt, I get at least 5 people coming up to me and saying, go Zohran, I'm so excited. It's really, there's a sense in New York that good things can finally, that good things can happen, which is a feeling that we'd sort of lost. We didn't really think it was possible anymore. So it is very thrilling. I didn't know what would happen. I thought he had a very small chance of winning. I would not say that I predicted this in any way, and I'm delighted that he won.
It's fabulous. So you published this book in 2022, and in it, you actually mention Mamdani's successful campaign for New York State Assembly, which was 2020. What can you tell us about his career before he became a mayoral candidate? Did you see him as a rising star? Like, kind of, how did he set himself up to get this done?
Sure. I did not know him as well as a lot of other folks in the NYC DSA. That's the New York City chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. Many of my comrades from DSA knew him better than I did, but he was always an organizer. He was always involved in the same kinds of things that he's fighting for now. I know one thing that he did that really impressed people at the time was his participation in this hunger strike. I believe it was a 15-day hunger strike to ultimately win hundreds of millions of dollars in debt relief for taxi drivers in New York City. There was this whole fight with the medallions. Many people, immigrants mostly, come to New York City, scrape and save and work really hard to buy these medallions. The city inflated the value. Lyft came in And there were all sorts of forces that made these medallions, made it almost impossible to pay back the debt. Then there was a wave of suicides. And so Zohran he was really side by side with those workers fighting for debt relief, and they won that debt relief. And I know that he's beloved of New York City taxi drivers. That's been apparent throughout. And he's done, just a lot of different things like that. He also was behind a free bus pilot program, which he got done in the assembly, and that did go very, very well. And that's part of why it became a plank in his platform now. So he really established himself as a fighter, as a serious organizer, and as somebody who was on the side of working people and willing to take, to put his body on the line for them.
Why does the free bus thing piss people off so much? We have a free streetcar in Kansas City. Nobody's upset about that. I don't really understand that.
I don't understand it either, to be quite honest. And I think most people, when they hear it, think it sounds pretty good. There was a New York Magazine story that I actually wrote. I wrote an analysis of that story and the ways it was used to kind of undermine him. And there was some unflattering stories from anonymous sources in that magazine story that they were trying to sort of discredit him. I don't even know who those people were because the reporter didn't use their names. So I think if you can't go on the record with your criticisms of somebody, maybe we should take those criticisms with a grain of salt.
So Mamdani is a member of DSA, as we talked about, Democratic Socialists of America. You've written a lot about the history of socialism and socialist politicians in America, a history that it seems to me is like widely misunderstood or if not just elided in mainstream media and in schools, and there's a really nice section of the book where you talk a little bit about that. I wondered if you could just give us a sort of, background, short, not exactly a Wikipedia, but like a history of like socialism in America, and then read this passage from your book, which I thought was helpful.
Sure. So the section I'm going to read is sort of about the first 2 decades of the 20th century when there were all of these socialists in office, which is absolutely a forgotten chapter, and deliberately so, I think, and people just don't want this to be known. But certainly this has always existed. You mentioned I'm from Buffalo. Buffalo also elected a socialist mayor a few years ago, and she was buried in the general election by Republicans' business interests coming together to kind of put a lot of money into an independent run for the man that she had beaten in the Democratic primary. So we've seen this before. I hope that same thing won't happen to Zohran, but that's what happened to India Walton in Buffalo. And now I'll just read a little bit from the book. While the last several years have seen a resurgence of socialism, there have been a substantial number of socialists in office, and more broadly, a vibrant American left in the United States at various points throughout our history. The US Socialist Party was once a powerful third party. Its founder, Eugene Debs, received nearly 1 million votes during his 1920 bid for the presidency, even while incarcerated for delivering an anti-war speech. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, more than 1,000 socialists, including 2 members of Congress, dozens of state legislators, and over 130 mayors, were elected to public office throughout the United States, including in states like Texas, Mississippi, and Alabama, also many parts of the Midwest. After its heyday in the early 20th century, US democratic socialism has at various times dropped and risen in popularity, achieving a limited resurgence in the 1960s and 70s. In 1970, Ron Dellums, an African-American from California, became the first avowed socialist to win a seat in Congress since World War II, and again in the last decade. Even in years when American socialism was largely dormant as a political force, many still associated it with popular domestic policies and social equality. 1949 Gallup poll found that 12% of Americans believed socialism stood for equality, including equal rights and equal distribution of wealth. Overall, a combined 50% of respondents associated socialism with progressive policies. According to a 2019 Gallup poll, 43% of Americans believe socialism would be a good thing for the country, and Democrats view socialism more favorably than capitalism. 57% have a positive view of socialism. Only 47% of Democrats have a positive view of capitalism. A different Gallup poll taken around the same time indicated that 47% of Americans would vote for a socialist candidate for president, significantly lower than the proportion who are willing to vote for a gay or lesbian candidate, a Muslim, or an atheist. The Democratic Socialists of America has existed as an organization since 1982, the year the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee merged with the New American Movement, becoming what is today known as DSA, and the year I was born. At the time of its 2015 convention, DSA had just over 6,000 members nationwide. By 2021, it had more than 90,000 dues-paying members. According to the organization, roughly 22,000 of those members live in the Northeast, 10,000 in Hawaii, Alaska, and the American West, 13,240 in Texas and the Mountain States. So that means today there are more DSA members living in Oklahoma, Texas, and the Mountain States than there were in the entire country just 7 years ago. In late 2020, the organization launched a membership drive in hopes of recruiting upward of 100,000 members. This is comparable to the Communist Party of the United States, which had approximately 85,000 members at its peak in 1942. That socialism is again in vogue is primarily a function of the issues, Medicare for all, cancellation of medical and student debt, that DSA and politicians like Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, and now Zohran Mamdani, are best known for championing, and which feel especially urgent today. For young people who grew up watching presidents party with and get treated like celebrities, see Bill Clinton and Christina Aguilera, Barack Obama and Beyonce, it's especially appealing that new left leaders project humility and moral seriousness. Many respond favorably to politicians who behave like ordinary public servants, not members of untouchable elites. Asked what drew him to New York State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani's campaign, Omar Abu Hamama, then a 16-year-old volunteer from Astoria, Queens, told me that he enjoyed helping the campaign pack groceries and prepare meals to deliver to neighbors in need. I don't usually see politicians in the street helping people out themselves, he said admiringly of Mamdani, especially for younger people who are less likely than their forebears to belong to religious and civic organizations. DSA offers a powerful sense of camaraderie and the opportunity to be part of a community.
Thank you so much. So interesting to listen to that and think about Mamdani walking the length of Manhattan, for example.
Yeah.
You know, our Everyman campaign. So I really like this idea that the DSA and other progressive groups like the Justice Democrats or Sunrise or the Dream Defenders aren't interested in, you know, quote unquote celebrity candidates, and are instead offering members a form of community that has otherwise been kind of lost in their lives. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, that's what was most striking to me. It's actually a big part of what made me want to write my book, was just noticing that this is what it really is meaningful to people, to have a place to go and connect with like-minded people who are around your age, who share a lot of your beliefs, and who are working on a common project together, right? I mean, that is what democracy is at its best. That's what we're always saying we want to get back. That's what we want young people to engage with. You know, Zohran Mamdani won in part by expanding the electorate, right? He got a bunch of new people coming in. He got a bunch of 18 to 29-year-old people to vote, and they don't usually vote, period, let alone in primary elections. So he really did this kind of massive thing that so many people have wanted to do for so long. And as I said in the book, you know, religious communities are kind of waning in a lot of ways, especially for younger people, many of whom identify as spiritual in some way, but not religious, or not part of organized religion. And this really is a positive way to civically engage and to do something together that is for your community, and also where you meet friends. You know, I now know, I've been involved in DSA for long enough that I know 3 different babies who you know, whose parents met in DSA and then got together and made these babies. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. It's really one of the most touching things, and one of my favorite parts.
The other thing you wrote about that I did not know about, but that my son, who is a sophomore at NYU right now, who suggested this episode, by the way, is the Young Democratic Socialists of America. Like, there's a youth organization specifically on college campuses and high schools. Could you talk a little bit about that and how successful that has been, and what do they do when they're
Sure. And they exist. I don't have the numbers right at the top of my head, but there are chapters everywhere, all over the country. There are chapters in really conservative states on really conservative campuses. And so I think the college organizing aspect is a really crucial part of DSA. And I know there's a woman in my book who's now a leader in DSA. She was a college student when I talked to her at the time. I mean, this really is, funneling people into preparing them for leadership in a very serious way. Zohran Mamdani is a very young guy. He's going to be one of the youngest mayors we've ever had, I hope, in November. And you don't get there overnight without any kind of preparation. So I think YDSA is really laying the groundwork for that. And I admire these students so much, especially because they are doing this work in places where the entire state government, local government, and federal government is hostile to them, where there's seed money for Republican groups. They're up against corporately funded chapters of Turning Points USA, Young Republicans. They don't have any money. They just have true belief in a fairer world and in a society that works for everybody. So I think what they're doing is very, very important.
It's so
well,
interesting.
and it does
how,
really.
right,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Whitney.
Sorry. No, go ahead. That's good.
3, 2, 1. It is just, I'm inexplicably still on Twitter. I'm kind of trying to slowly move myself off. But I was following the election really on Twitter and watching the way that I think like kind of right wing posters who were getting put into my feed by like ads and things like that were sort of like using a lot of scare tactics, like and the scare tactics were things like calling him, say, a communist, calling him a socialist, and as though these were still effective pejoratives, which it seems like they're not, based on kind of this.
I saw a post. This is the post I was going to bring up, Sugi. That's like, there was one where it's like had a picture of a college age woman and said, we should send the Democratic Socialists to the countries that actually practice the policies that they're doing and see if they like that, And so I thought that was another kind of attack. But it's an awareness. I mean, as Raina was saying, the Republicans have been organizing on college campuses and in churches and among young people for a long time. Traditional Democrats are not doing it, which drives me fucking insane. And so it's good to have somebody doing it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that those slurs are losing their power in a lot of ways, partly because we've seen that they don't work on, say, Barack Obama or Joe Biden, right? Neither of whom are remotely socialists, but they were both called socialists. They were both called communists. Kamala Harris was called a communist. And, I don't think that worked against them. I think to the extent, Kamala lost for reasons, in my view, that were absolutely unrelated to being called a communist, which nobody believed in the first place. But I think one thing that's important that Zohran does so well is that he does not back down, right? He's very clearly defined himself. He's explained what that is and what the word means to him. And it's sort of like, he's not exactly take it or leave it. I think he wants you to come on board with his program, but he does it in a way that is open and honest and candid and like a leader, right? He's showing people what this could be and what it means to him.
It's nice to see that again. I think that we're so starved for like any examples of politicians being decent.
Yes.
Right. Like I've seen that video where he gives the press conference about, the death threats that he's received, and he's so human.
Yeah, exactly.
And he also doesn't back down.
That's right.
He's capable of showing emotion while at the same time remaining poised in himself. He doesn't seem like he's performing in the way that I often associate with campaigning and with politicians. So we've seen the fallout from Mamdani's election, and the right-wing scaremongering has kind of followed two tracks. And one has to do with his ethnic identity. He is the child of a professor and a filmmaker, and on social media, Texas Congressman Brandon Gill suggested that Mamdani should, quote, go back to the third world in response to a video of him eating with his hands. I just want to point out here that Brandon Gill is married to Dinesh D'Souza's daughter. And anyway, I have a lot of feelings and thoughts about this. But anyway, Trump has threatened to deport Mamdani, which is like outrageous. And yet, as you point out in your book, the DSA has received criticism for being too white in the past. It's kind of like this is also a thing that was sort of like launched at Bernie when he was running. How effective do you think these attacks on Mamdani's identity and to sort of go back to the third world, the Islamophobic attacks, et cetera, are likely to be?
I am hopeful that they won't be very effective. And I'll tell you one way that I think we can tell that they won't be is that I received in the last week before voting closed in this election, 20 pieces of mail calling him a radical, basically a radical Muslim. Implicit was the word terrorist. There was like, blood spattered lettering. One of them was in Hebrew, and it translated to something about thou shalt not spill the blood of your brother. Lots of just kind of unhinged stuff about his, they can only be described as racist attacks, and they didn't work. They didn't stop him. The other thing that they kept saying about him is that he's a Nepo baby, which I find very, very funny in view of the fact that his opponent, his closest opponent in the race, was a 3-term governor of New York and the son of a 3-term governor of New York. I mean, that's a much, much greater advantage, especially in politics, than anything that Zohran grew up with. I think that Zohran has one thing I really admire him for, among many things, is his steadfast standing up for and support of Mahmoud Khalil, who was, kidnapped, taken from his family, put in a God knows where in a facility in Louisiana on the basis of speech, right? For what the federal administration decided was basically a crime against America, but was based entirely on his participation in pro-Palestine rallies and protests. And Zohran stood by Mahmoud Khalil. Mahmoud Khalil was eventually, after heavy pressure from organizers like Zohran Mamdani, was released and united with his family. And I think what the lesson from that is that you don't get anywhere from responding to the really racist, fascist aggression of people like Donald Trump with a defensive crouch. You can only win by standing up for yourself, by being brave, and by uniting with other people, right? By having a large organization behind you, by having people behind you. And that's what Zohran has done.
One thing that I noticed is that, and was thinking about, and I haven't seen people write about this, is that the clampdown on pro-Palestinian protests happened on college campuses. Those protests were on college campuses. Columbia University was specifically attacked, but so was NYU. So were a lot of colleges. The people who were being detained are college students. The people who are being affected by Trump's policies are like foreign students who are at colleges, but young people are observing this right now. The right has seemed to think that this is a good issue for them, but isn't it possible that the huge turnout in this election has to do with the fact that young people did not like being treated this way?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'll tell you, I follow a bunch of political analysts on Twitter, which I'm still on, or X, or whatever it is now. And one of them has claimed throughout this race that every time they attacked Zohran on those grounds, that he was an anti-Semite, he gained ground, that it helped him, in fact. Because I think people see this as part of the Republican playbook, enabled, unfortunately, and supported and allowed in many ways and at many times by leading Democrats. But really, it's the Republicans who have taken the ball and run with it and are now in charge of the federal government, right? And people don't like this. I mean, it's grotesque. It's a violation of all of our values as Americans, I think. And I will just say, as a Jewish American, I have been so moved by Zohran Mamdani's steadfast support with Jews, his support from Jews. Many of his voters were American Jews and New York City Jews. Brad Lander, the top Jewish official in the race, endorsed him. Bernie Sanders, the most popular Jewish politician in America, endorsed him. And so I just think it really takes the wind out of their sails to point out these clear facts, which is that he grew up in New York City, surrounded by Jews, and he loves and has close relationships and close political connections with many, many Jewish people.
Whitney, do you want to take the next question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. 3, 2. So one of the other attacks, slightly more substantive, centers on his actual policy ideas, specifically his idea of building kind of a network of government-owned grocery stores. I think five to help keep down food prices. And according to the Atlantic, 2/3 of New Yorkers and 54% Republicans support public groceries. Like, how likely is this attack to land?
I don't think it's very likely, because I'll tell you, people were drawn to him by his policy platform. That was a huge thing that people responded to. I know from all of the volunteering that I did and knocking on doors, there were people who came to these canvases for Zohran. And I still remember one woman saying, "I'm here." We went around at the beginning and said, "What brought you here? What are you excited about? What about this campaign speaks to you and has drawn you in?" And she said, "I took a New York City bus to get here, and it took us 40 minutes to make 2 stops." And she said, I'm for Zohran because I want fast, free buses. That's a thing that people really, really want. And Bill de Blasio was, by the end of his term, his last term in office, he was not very popular. But I'll tell you what is popular, and that is universal pre-K, which is something that Bill de Blasio ran on, campaigned on, and got done. And there is no parent that I know, and I know a lot of parents in New York City, who is not grateful to him for that. So I think that I hope they'll try it all. The policies are popular. They can go after him on this fake anti-Semitism stuff, and they can attack him for being a brown Muslim man. But I don't think any of that is going to work, because I think we've seen from those election results that the American people, and especially New Yorkers, are sick of that and don't buy it.
There was a section in the book where you talked about I don't know, I can't remember all the players, so you'll have to remind me of them, but it was like somebody from the New York Post, and they were having an assembly talking about Mamdani, and it was a woman who had emigrated here from, I think, communist Russia, and was saying, "You must be very afraid of these policies. These are terrible. They're awful. They're going to be really bad." And here's a tweet that I bookmarked the other day that I saw from a software person, of course, somebody in Silicon Valley. Good times bring communism. Communism creates hard times. Hard times revive capitalism. Capitalism creates good times. That is not what I think that my son's experience of like the economy of the world has been, or young people. Like, what they remember is the housing crisis of 2008. That was a capitalist induced, disaster, and other the tariff things that Trump is doing now. I mean, all kinds of stuff that have been capitalist failures within their lifetime, not problems with socialism. Am I wrong to suspect that that might also help him out?
I think that's exactly right. And I say in my book, young people have been through so much, two global recessions, just ongoing and ever worsening climate catastrophe, a crisis of gun violence that we have not meaningfully addressed, that I just think is pretty much the same year after year. And they feel very destabilized, and then they see their parents doing things like, a lot of the parents, the people I know who are my parents' age, which is in their early 70s, they were able to buy homes. They were able to get steady jobs that paid them a decent wage. Those things are increasingly rare, and people are responding accordingly. So obviously, the material conditions of your life will shape your feelings about these things. And what they don't want to say about Zohran is that clearly he is a democratic socialist. He's not a Stalinist communist. There's no authoritarian element to what he is proposing. And New Yorkers in particular, I think, are pro public goods and services, right? I mean, that's how the city runs. We use the subway, we use the libraries, we use public goods all the time, and they're a very important part of being a New Yorker.
I should have added on the list of bad things that capitalism have done during my son's lifetime is income inequality and housing, as you've mentioned, and an erosion of public services, an erosion of the regulation, ways that capitalism gets more and more unfair and more difficult to break into. Not to mention what's going to happen with AI. So, I mean, I think all those things are playing into this, and I think that older, more traditional politicians who are not paying attention are being foolish. You write about a
And
bunch of
their debt
other.
burden. I'm sorry, their
Yeah,
debt
go
burden
ahead.
as
Go
well,
for
right?
it.
I
Debt
mean,
burdens, student loans.
the
Yes,
student
of
loans are
course.
crazy. Medical debt is a bigger and bigger issue for more and more people. I mean, I still think of myself as a young person, although increasingly I am not. And I've accrued significant medical debt from things that were beyond my control, right? Medical issues I've had. So I think yes, all of these things are definitely shaping people's politics and worldviews.
So Mamdani's not the only. I mean, your book is not about him, right? We brought you on to talk about him because he's the news right now. But I want to. There were a bunch of other groups that you mentioned and politicians in your book that are playing leading roles right now. Like the book was very prescient in that way. You talk about Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, who had their big against oligarchy tour. Indivisible, which you write about, organized the most successful anti-Trump protests to date, at least for this term, the No Kings March. Why? And meanwhile, the progressive Democrats ain't doing jack squat, as far as I can tell, and everyone's complaining about it. So why are the progressives winning here, or at least being successful? And what have they been doing to prepare for this moment that traditional Democrats haven't?
I think that there are two answers to that, and one is the failures of the Democratic Party, right? I mean, people have seen the Democratic Party lose to Trump twice, and this is a guy that the Democratic Party, the top people in the Democratic Party, said was a clown, said was not a real threat, said was ridiculous, said was they wanted, in fact, Hillary Clinton wanted him to be her opponent because she thought she'd have an easier time beating him. And so they have not met the moment, right? And people can see that, and people are frustrated by that. And the other reason I would say for the success of these more progressive organizations is that they are dealing with, and this is something that really bothers me, is that the left is always painted as somehow out of touch with people's actual lives. And in fact, it's the left wing of the Democratic Party, it's the progressive organizations outside of the Democratic Party, it's DSA, that are engaging with people's actual concerns, right? That are addressing people's material needs, that want people to have health care, that want people to have child care, that want people to be able to afford a home, that want you not to go bankrupt from seeing a doctor or from getting a life-saving operation, right? This is what they're offering. The Democratic Party is offering consultant-approved language. It doesn't really mean anything or say anything. They don't want to make any real promises. They don't want to make any real commitments to their voters, and they're frankly out of step with their base. I mean, in very dramatic ways, right? I mean, a large, I don't want to say a number because I don't know what the latest number is, but a majority of Democratic voters are disgusted with what Israel is doing, want no military support, want us really to pull back on that and have some conditions on the aid at the very least. And the Democratic Party leadership is saying, no, you don't get any of the things that you want. We don't care that you want Medicare for all. We don't care that you're tired of wars. We don't care that your kids can't afford houses or college. And, people are tired of that, and they want an alternative to that, and they deserve an alternative to that.
So not only have the Democrats failed to meet the moment in terms of Trump, but the kind of centrist Democrats have been going after progressive Democrats in ways that are really problematic. We're recording on July 3rd. And as of Monday, June 30th, New York's Democratic governor, Kathy Hochul, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, and House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries have yet to endorse Mamdani. And Chuck Schumer is the same guy who's basically giving himself cookies for getting the big, beautiful bill renamed, which not effective at all. It didn't matter. And these are not people known for their effective leadership at this point. And, Kirsten Gillibrand made really problematic comments about Mamdani, and then has apologized, but really not at the same volume at which she made her original comments, which I think accused him of making statements about jihad.
Yeah.
And so, like, what is going on with these people?
Look, they're accountable to their corporate donors. That, I mean, they raise a lot of money from people that they don't want to piss off. And Kathy Hochul in particular, I think her concern. I'm speculating. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of her motives, but I would say that she is worried that that Zohran and his movement and the people behind him are going to successfully push her to raise taxes on the rich, which she does not want to do because she's raising money from rich people who don't want her to do that. So, there's an incentive structure here that they're responding to, and this is part of the problem. But it's not surprising to me that they haven't embraced the man that I think is the future of the Democratic Party, if they're lucky, if he stays in the Democratic Party and helps them revive their fortunes. It's not surprising to me that they haven't come out for him yet. I hope that some of them will with time. I think that, we've seen a lot of large labor unions that had backed Cuomo have already just in the last few days come over to Zohran. So I think we're going to see some of that. But, to the extent that they don't end up endorsing him or embracing him, they're on the wrong side of history and they're going to look foolish.
Hochul may have changed her tune. I thought I saw some tweets from her just today defending him against some other Republican attacks. That doesn't mean that she's endorsed him, but anyway, okay. Here's the thing that I hear now from like more traditional Democrats, like the Pod Save America dudes or the Bulwark people, or whatever, right? They say like, okay, they're on that, like, it's really great. He won in New York, but New York's not the rest of America. You can't run candidates like this in Ohio. You can't run them in Missouri, where I am, or whatever, but I note that first of all those Democratic leaders are all coastal, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have no clue how to attract voters in the Midwest and South. So to imagine that Chuck Schumer's going to know how to talk, or some candidate working with Chuck Schumer's going to know how to get votes. Democrats are getting slaughtered in the Midwest and South. So why can't like the DSA work, or these other groups work in the Midwest and South? I mean, my friend Tom Frank, who we've had on the show a bunch of times, wrote, many years ago about the progressive movement in Kansas, that it did exist in the same time frame that you were talking about in your reading. So are these candidates a potential pathway to breaking the Republican stranglehold on these, like, quote unquote, red regions?
Yeah, absolutely they are. And the most important statistic I've seen so far of Zohran's voter base is that I believe 30% of the districts that he won were districts that went for Trump, right? So he flipped Trump voters. There were a number of Trump to Zohran voters. That's one way you get people back. But I think that the clear path, I mean, what he did, and many people have said this, including leading Democrats who now are refusing or hesitating to endorse him, they see what he's done, which is a laser-like focus on affordability, on cost of living issues, on what people really need to make their lives better, I think, and not condescending to people, right? He really is somebody who projects warmth and empathy and a real interest and curiosity about people and what they need and what they think. And he went out and did these interviews with Trump voters and said, what did you like about the guy? And he engaged with that. And that's something that, the Democratic Party is all over the place with their messaging, but they, in the first time they lost to Trump, it was a lot of, well, anyone who voted for Trump is an irredeemable racist, which is not the way to get people back into the fold. It's just not, even if you think it's true, it's not smart politics. And Zohran doesn't do that. He doesn't talk down to people. He's genuinely curious about them, and he tries to meet them where they are. And I think that is the path forward. And that's what he did so successfully and effectively. And obviously, given our history, there is a path to that again in the Midwest and in the South. But it's an alchemy that has to kind of work out just right. And with Zohran, he had all of these different elements, right? He had 50,000 volunteers. He had an organization behind him, DSA, a bunch of organizations behind him, primarily DSA, and he has unique charisma, unique talent, a unique interest in working very, very hard to do this. So some of it is candidate quality. That's something you have limited control over. But I definitely think that there is a path. And we've seen, I mean, you mentioned earlier the AOC and Bernie rallies, which have been in red districts and red states, right? These are not, they're not just talking to college kids at Columbia or NYU, and they're massive, massive rallies. There's a real hunger out there for this all over the country. And the other thing I would say about Zohran's voter base is that New York City is unfairly characterized all the time. And I've been in New York for 20 years. I've lived my whole adult life here. It is not, it's not a far left place, right? We've had Republican governors, we've had Republican mayors, we've had it's the global capital of finance. So there are a lot of moneyed interests here, and there's a lot of right-wing activity and money. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, who is nominally a Democrat, was funded by Trump Republicans and Trump billionaires. So I don't think that New York is this far left place. I think in many ways it's a microcosm, because there are so many different people here from so many parts of the world and so many parts of the country. It's a microcosm of the Democratic electorate in the country at large.
Well, listening to all of this and appreciating your analysis, really hoping, I live in Minneapolis, where we have a DSA candidate for mayor, hoping we can replicate this. I'm going to go knock on some doors for Omar Fateh. Raina, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And listeners, we want to encourage you to go pick up Raina's book, The Rise of a New Left, at your local independent bookstore.